Hello everybody, and welcome to tonight's and December 2022's edition of the Braver Angels Solutions Exchange, a program of the Braver Angels Washington, D.C. Alliance. My name is Nathan Phillips. I'm Publius for Public Discourse and the Red co-chair of the Braver Angels D.C. Alliance. And I am grateful that the Solutions Exchange Committee has again invited me to chair a little conversation on a subject I know almost nothing about. We've got always fun little things. Hello, everybody on our audience tuning in nationally. Hello, everybody here joining us here in Washington, D.C. As we approach the holiday season, I think this is a subject that is dear to a lot of our hearts, and we shall see what we can learn this time. So, the subject for tonight is families and politics. As a lot of you know, there is a literal Braver Angels workshop called Families and Politics. As some of you know as well, the very origins of Braver Angels' existence as an organization is in the spirit of family therapy and marriage counseling. Something that many of us believe in our personal lives as well as in our political lives. And this is a subject that tends to make a lot of human interest stories in the national media every Thanksgiving and Christmas. I think we have an uptick in reporter interest in Braver Angels every Thanksgiving and Christmas actually too. So subject worth thinking on, and I could not be joined by two more comprehensively, like, dialectically different thinkers on the approach of that. And because of that unique dialectic, perhaps we can approach the beginnings of the going. So furthest to the right on the panel, but not necessarily ideologically, is Rena Bernard's, one of the real OGs of the Braver Angels workshop moderators team. She has saved my butt multiple times in terms of making sure that workshops actually happen by someone who is actually trained to run a workshop. Thank you for that, Rena. She's the developer of the DA Common Ground workshop. And she and her husband, Tom, have been in DA from the very beginning, advising and counseling on ways the workshops can best be structured and best be maintained for bringing out the spirit of counseling and the spirit of the truly familial things. And if I'm thinking about this right, Rena, you are actually a marriage counselor in real life too. Yeah. So she knows her stuff. Am I forgetting anything about ways that she introduced her? Well, Rena, you're one of my favorite people in DA, and have been for longer than a lot of people, so thank you for those. I'm also joined in the center by somebody who's not necessarily, although perhaps the most centrist in this panel, James Coan, the outgoing blue co-chair of the Braver Angels DC Alliance and the forthcoming founder of More Like Us, a new nonprofit being set up to go highlight the similarities and common ground between Americans on many different fronts. James is like, I wouldn't call him the grand strategist. I would call him the comprehensive institutional systems thinker of the grand strategy of depolarization. You know how, like, there's a way that grand strategies like move into pieces, but then like institutional design is defining what the pieces are. That's what James does. And he has been doing that both on his own and inside Braver Angels for many years. He currently does a lot of work with the marketing committee and economies of scale and messaging. And I think one of the things that's interesting here is that family is in some ways the lowest level of society. But if you're going to depolarize society, you must operate as well at some of the highest levels. And I think James can bring some interesting stuff to that. James, is there anything that I'm forgetting on how to do this?
No, that was very nice. Your checks and don't make more else.
I will turn them back in ASAP. Anyways, so tonight we're going to discuss some different aspects of what family in America looks like contemporaneously, and how political polarization affects that, and perhaps some various ways forward. So I think the immediate thing that I'll throw in here is that there's the kind of like horror psychology of Braver Angels is the idea that your crazy right-wing uncle and your loony left-wing niece should be able to meet together at Thanksgiving and talk about Donald Trump or the Bin Laden discourse on Twitter and hash it out, maybe be mean to each other for a little bit, and then by the end of it, clink their glasses and be back to the family, right? Like at some level, the Braver Angel ethos has always been you need to be able to have the disagreement, the argument, even vitriolically, in a way that still fundamentally preserves the relationship at the end of the day. And under those conditions, you have this kind of situation where there's this idea of America as a whole as something resembling a family, and every American being something resembling kin to every other American, at least across a political divide. And so on that note, I think there's obviously different ways that you can promote that vision. There's different ways you can practice that vision. But I'd be curious what both of you have observed, both through practice and through thinking and research about that for the last couple of years. So Rita, first off to you.
All right. Okay, well, we are a cozy group here. So I'm going to ask a personal question for starters. How many of you have experienced some form of tension around polarization on political issues in your family? Wow. Is that, you're the only one not?
I don't know, I get along with, I mean, there's different opinions, but I get along with everything.
Okay.
So I don't think it's much.
Tension, so I'm defining tension as an uncomfortableness, a kind of worry, how will this go? What if this topic comes up? That kind of thing. And, you know, it doesn't have to be Republican and Democrat. In my family, it's Democrat and further left. You know, our son comes in and has lots of ways that he disagrees with some of our opinions, and it does cause tension sometimes. Over 40% of Americans would be uncomfortable with an inter-party marriage in their families. Now that's up from single digits in the 1960s. So clearly this has become more and more evident in our families. And as polarization worsens in the society as a whole, it becomes more of an issue in families. There was a study that showed that in 2015, Thanksgiving dinners that had members from each party at the table lasted 30 to 40 minutes shorter. So people were ready to get their coats on and leave a lot sooner than if everybody was from the same political perspective. In a 2022 New York Times Siena College poll, they found that 19% of Americans had a strained relationship with a family member or friend. And that's 26 million adults. And I'm going to read from what their findings were. In interviews, people across the ideological spectrum told similar stories of estrangements, conversations broken off with siblings and children, decades-long friendships that have gone quiet. So this is a really serious problem, I believe. I will tell you a story. There was a family, and this is a family that showed up in my office. The father had switched political allegiance, leading to a lot of tense conversations with adult children. Finally, the father had it, and he cut off relationships with all his children and all his grandchildren. This caused a tremendous amount of hurt throughout the family, and it took many therapy sessions and years of work to bring the family back together. And I believe that this is replicated throughout the country, right? I've had calls saying, my uncle wants to come in for family therapy because we can't talk to each other, and he really wants to be able to talk. And so it's showing up And, um, and I think therefore it's something for us to look at seriously. What happens when there's polarization in family? There can be tension about broaching certain subjects. Other issues can get entwined: sibling rivalry, parental disapproval, jealousies, old hurts can get stirred up. So what might start as a discussion about a political issue can turn into a very emotionally scarring experience. At worst, family members who won't talk to each other. And, we call this a cutoff. 10% of Americans report a family cutoff over politics. At the extreme, that's at one extreme where there's a cutoff. I just can't talk to him. I can't bring my children around him or her. And at the other extreme, families get together and just avoid politics, right? And that has its cost, avoiding politics. Thanksgiving dinners are shorter. People feel less close, maybe get together less often, share less about their lives. Bill Doherty defines 6 roles that family members can take. The gladiator, somebody comes in and immediately wants to start a fight around a political issue. The defender is somebody who doesn't go first, but once something's said, they can get in there and really juice it up and say something that might be insulting to the other side. The sniper, who sits back and every once in a while, shoots a little barb. The peacemaker, who tries to prevent these conversations from happening. Maybe it's time for dessert, and let's stay away from politics. Let's stay away from talking about religion. The bystander, who has their face in their cell phone, and just keeps their mouth shut, head down. Or the engager. An engager is the person who tries to have respectful conversations across differences. And when we do the workshop that Bill Doherty created on family and politics, the goal is to teach the skills so that people can be better engagers. So why is it important to try to impact family polarization? First of all, from a mental health and public health perspective, strained families and cutoffs of relationships can lead to loneliness, an increase in health problems. Loneliness itself is linked to heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, depression, and anxiety. And sometimes families will just avoid politics and say the relationship is too important. But the cost is great to us as a society when that happens. Because, I'm going to paraphrase Martin Luther King, the group consisting of parents and their child is the main educational agency of humanity. So this is where young people really hone their ideas. I mean, I grew up with incredible polarization in my family. My mother married a liberal rabbi, her sister married a communist, another sister married a Zionist, and my uncle was in business. So we had incredible conversations, and contentious ones at times, but the family always stayed together. And I think that became a real learning ground for me in a political education, because we have these conversations. So there's a lot lost when the conversations don't happen. And it impacts the political and civic education of the next generation. The other thing about families and politics is that while there's additional tensions and additional reasons why people may want to avoid these conversations or have a hard time having them, there's also a sense of responsibility that people have to educate their family members. And so there's a lot of motivation. Sometimes this can lead to conflict. but it can also lead to productive conversations, which leads, the more productive conversations, I think, as Luke was saying, our belief in Brave Ranges, the more of these productive conversations, the more the society as a whole can work towards tackling the problems that we have. So if we avoid these productive conversations, solutions that may be apparent don't come to the surface, and we as a society are stuck. So while there's more complicated feelings, because they're family members, there's also a deeper motivation to have yourself understood, to explain things from family members. You take a trip abroad, you want to share what you learned with your family. There's always a funny line that sticks in my mind, and of course this is from a blue perspective, but after the 2016 election, there was much conversation about Thanksgiving. And, it was just a few weeks after the election, and what do you do when you go home and you have these divisions? And I just remember a Black woman, probably a journalist on the radio, saying, I wish you had talked to your family members before the election. So there's that sense of some responsibility that people feel towards impacting their family. So I'm just going to end with a few hints that Julian Adorni, a Brave Ranger leader, put out in a letter recently to the community. When you're talking politics and things get heated, stay non-reactive. You don't have to respond with anger. Be prepared to put old family issues aside and stay present to the person. And secondly, focus on the relationship. Remind each other what's good in the relationship. Reach for what brings you together as family. Connect to the love you have for each other, and then successful conversations can follow when you have that touchstone. And this quote, we win over hearts, then minds, not the other way around. So if we stay connected to our family members in an emotional sense, we have the ability to have that mind-to-mind conversation. So that's it for now.
Rena, I have some follow-ups on some of the communitarian aspects you suggested, but the thing occurred to mind when you were discussing your family backdrop. I believe you said that there was a Zionist uncle, a communist uncle, a businessman uncle. Presumably there's some anarcho-syndicalists somewhere in there along the line too.
My father was a rabbi.
There we have it. And so I guess there's a part of me that wonders to what degree is a family of highly cerebral and self-aware political radicals somewhat more capable of being a model of familial political discourse than, like, say, a American white Midwestern kind of normie Republican, normie Democrat split family where politics is not nearly as cerebral. It's kind of a thing in the culture that people live with, but it's not something that they think about or argue about a lot. I'm wondering to what degree you think.
Good question. Maybe there was some common language. On the other hand, there's some really deep-seated disagreements. So my communist uncle actually stayed communist after the Soviet Union.
That's principle.
And he followed, if people know anything about Soviet history, there was the doctor's plot, where Stalin accused Jews of killing, Jewish doctors of killing members of the leaders of the Politburo. I'm getting these words right, I think. Mm-hmm. And my uncle expressed that opinion, and people said they thought my father was going to kick him out of the house, but he didn't. Mm-hmm. In some fashion. This was before I was born. But anyway, I heard the story.
We'll follow up on that soon. I'm curious some more. But in the meantime, Thank you, Rena, for this. James, you come at this from kind of a different side, a different method of analysis. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us what this means for the general kind of messaging approach or media and climate on the nature of family and politics in general.
Yeah, or kind of strategist, what is it? Institutional
systems thinker, yeah.
Okay. Institutional systems thinker related to depolarization. Well, first of all, thank you for coming. Good to see some new people here, in person and online. Yeah, so right. I mean, Rena is the expert when it comes to family therapy and all the details. Just as a strategist, I will start by going back to the data. Right, there's a different way to look at the data a little bit. So we'll both refer to, I think, the same New York Times study. This is from October 2022. The question was, have you had any disagreements recently with family or friends over political issues that hurt your relationship? The answer was 19% yes. Okay, well, that's tens of millions of people, but that's also 81% no. And so when you're thinking about strategy, right, like usually it's the 80-20 rule, which means you should devote, whatever is the easiest 20% to the 80%, right? So there's always a question, just how much emphasis should there be when this is not the majority? I mean, it's important, but again, not the majority. That doesn't answer the question, but I just want to put in context that data could be interpreted in different ways. I want to start, but I totally changed what I was going to say because Norman Lear passed away today, right? And so it's sad, but he's 101, right? I mean, he's the creator of All in the Family, right? If you want examples of political differences within a family, I mean, there aren't too many, more obvious cases than this that are well known. Right, between Archie Bunker, a more conservative, usually considered bigoted individual, and others in his sphere. Probably the most obvious is his son-in-law, who we call Meathead, actual name Mike. So I mean, what can the show and his other work tell us? To me, as Luke was saying, I think a lot about media. What and other ways to depolarize aside from workshops, and clearly there are options out there besides workshops, or besides in the more kind of extreme cases, or if it's needed to go to a therapist, as a family and really work out issues with a third party. But for those who don't necessarily need that, right? I mean, what we see in the media, I mean, whether it's scripted or unscripted or whatever, I think does is important. And there is a group out there called Bridge Entertainment Labs. There's a friend of Braver Angel, Stephen Olacara, who's now in charge of that out in LA. And so they're thinking about this kind of question. But I think also that depolarization doesn't occur magically. I mean, I don't really know if the All in the Family improved attitudes toward various groups. I'm not an expert on it, but Archie Bunker is, yes, fairly lovable in some ways, but also like a real bigot in other ways. Like, does this improve views of blue collar white Americans? I don't know. I mean, to me, actually, a different show, The Jeffersons, at least the premise would be more obvious to me at improving views of a group. I mean, The Jeffersons, a black family, are moving on up to the east side, right? So that this is that they're right now wealthier, and right, it improves maybe views of African Americans. At this Bridge Entertainment Labs event, there was a showrunner from the Connors. So that's the reboot of Roseanne. And it was very fascinating listening to this, to the showrunner, because he has a PhD in psychology. And, this is one of the few programs at least that I know of on TV that focuses on a blue collar white family. And right, so he's like talking about like what he's doing from a psychological standpoint and how he's integrating this, not making it this some like boring, I don't know, piece of fable for adults, like, right, it's engaging content, but still, trying to present people in realistic ways that would hopefully like improve attitudes toward various groups. And so, I mean, it's just a more general kind of intro. I think it's important to try to reach people who don't have the time, interest, energy to come to workshops or events like this. Again, I very much appreciate that you do, but you start having to multiply in your head. How many of these are needed to reach hundreds of millions of people? Will they actually show up? I think the answer is no. So, how do you reach the vast majority of Americans? And I would say, yeah, and so these kind of in the context of this, if we're communicating about families, right? Like, how do we communicate for those who don't want, who still have family issues, right? There's 19%, that's tens of millions of people, more than we're ever going to get in workshops. But how can we communicate with them? That's a little bit different from just like how to talk to anyone. And Rena was talking about some kind of love. So at least this touchstone. And so, okay, that's maybe an understandable concept that can be communicated without too much explanation to a broad audience. That makes it a little bit different than, say, talking to a stranger or talking to some kind of acquaintance that you just happen to disagree with. And finally, kind of like, what is our goal, right? Or, I mean, it can be multiple goals. Rena was talking about public health, loneliness, and educating kids, and which are important. Also, with Brave Angels, depolarizing the country, right? Like, so how do we do that? And I mean, if one has a relationship that's positive with someone from the other, who tends to vote differently, that tends to be good. But I think by groups, so there was a representativeness question. Like, okay, I'm friends with this one, or is this person representative of this broader group? Like, how does that connect? It does connect to some extent, but it can be fuzzy when we're thinking about attitudes toward groups. So, to me, there's another kind of very different way to think about this, which is, feelings of threat, negative emotions, distortions about the other group. And so, like, literally talking to someone saying, I know people who vote like you aren't as extreme as is often portrayed in the media, or things like that. And also, the people who I'm friends with who vote like me don't tend to be as extreme as those that you see, right? That often we're distorted in thinking that they're more different and more threatening than they really are. And these individual conversations could specifically target that. Now, in addition to just preserving the relationship and educating and having deep conversations about political topics, but directly going at how people feel and think about a different group.
I'm suddenly reminded that this year I have been reading a lot of biography on the Roosevelt family for largely personal reasons, and there's a way that the political feuds between the Democratic children of Franklin Roosevelt and the Franklin Roosevelt family itself, the Hyde Park Roosevelts, and the Republican children of Theodore Roosevelt, the Oyster Bay Roosevelts, and the sheer vast amount of cultural cachet and media and political power those families held, while also being like petty to each other in the stupidest ways around Thanksgiving table. Kind of at some like metaphysical level melds both the highest aspirations of national politics in the ways that it can become petty and stupid, and the lowest level family trust and ways people treat each other that meld both political conviction and like personal slights over the years and like affection to like moving things. So I don't know, we don't think about dynastic politics in America very much these days, but maybe there's more in there to mull. If anybody wants to start a political dynasty and like have half of them be Republicans, half of them be Democrats, there is much good ground to cover here. I think, Rena, I'm curious what you think of as being the fundamental distinction between polarization between friends and polarization between family members? Or is there a fundamental distinction, or is it something that basically works in a similar way, just more intensely? How have you observed that, and how would you think about that?
I would say it depends on how close the friendships are. There are some friendships that are like family members. And, we all know those in our lives that, it's like family. It's like their family. You've known them since they were young or whatever. Those can have some of the same dynamics. But I think there's a real difference between close friends and family and, let's say, the guy you work with or your neighbor. Because walking away doesn't have as much pain and doesn't cause as much pain. I think that 19% is an interesting figure because, as you expressed, it's something that caused real pain, right? It's not just like you have that tension. And I think we have to raise the figure of 40% that don't want an inter-party marriage in their family as well. So it's not just the ones that are really in pain about this. It's the ones that also just don't want that to happen. And for some reason, that has grown tremendously from single digits to now 40%. So the polarization out there in the world is coming into the family. When it comes into the family, it cuts deeper. All the family dynamics, the pain, the jealousy, the dysfunctional in the family, all that comes to the surface and it gets acted out in the polarization issues.
James, at the wargaming level, higher above just the level of the family itself, there's all kinds of reams of data, like looking at the nature of the family in America today, right? I think there's a lot of stuff suggesting that people with multiple college degrees are both more capable of starting families earlier, but they also tend to not start families earlier for a mix of financial and professional reasons and stuff like that. Richard Reeves over at Brookings had written a lot of stuff on the differences in internal family dynamics among upwardly mobile professional managerial class families versus your kind of like lower class, lower income families, both in urban and suburban and rural environments, right? And so I guess there's like a whole sociology of the family that probably has something underlying the politics of the family in America today, right? There's probably something that people doing strategic messaging on this should be thinking about in terms of like, well, where are family, how does the number of children in an average religious family affect this, right? Or how does the connectedness of a nuclear family to the rest of the extended family affect this? And I mean, there's been a long history of family studies in America dating all the way back to Pat Moynihan and beyond on the breakdown and the reconstitution of the American family. How should we be thinking about that in the context of polarization? Like factors that have nothing to do with political ideology in itself. How do those factors affect polarization and political ideology and feelings?
Yeah.
This is another dissertation I'll have to say. Yeah.
And one thesis, that was it, no dissertation. I mean, the first thing I'm thinking about, okay, so Moynihan's report was mostly focused on Black Americans, right, in the 60s. But white Americans, I mean, we're in a multiracial, multicultural country, but some of the easiest to talk white and Black to start with. A lot of these white families where people do not have college degrees, right, are much less stable, right? There's a very large divorce gap between those who have college degrees and those who don't. There's a very large, out of wedlock birth kind of gap. And when it comes to polarization, I guess something about at least there are a lot of kind of, you say, upper middle class intact blue families, right, as a stereotype. And right, being, I guess, sensitive to the difficulty of having these unstable family environments. I think in college there was a fragile families study that I dealt with. And so I think there's a certain amount of compassion about, of people who now we would often consider pretty core to Trump's coalition, who are dealing with various, personal or familial instability type issues, and not to demonize this group without considering these other factors that can encourage a desire for some stability somewhere, and sense of worth and dignity that can come from places that a lot of blue Americans would think shouldn't go there, but we can at least understand that kind of desire for that stability and pride when it's often not entirely there.
What do you think of the idea of America as a nation as something of an extended family in itself? To what degree is that a useful metaphor for anything, either in terms of making people believe it or in terms of helping analysts think about it? And this is a question for both of you, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, right. So there's a concept of a civic religion, right? That I don't know about a family, right? I mean, okay, what are melting pot? As this man knows, he encouraged me to write about a chili bowl. It's not a salad bowl, because then we're just kind of next to each other, but not mixed at all. Melting pot, we have no individuality or uniqueness. So this is somewhere in the middle. So yes, thank you for that.
That's my greatest service to America to this date.
So, okay, in psychology there are like cross-cutting and superordinate identities. So insofar as there's something that we agree on, superordinate, like above, that kind of ties us together, I think that's helpful. I don't know if I would describe this in familial terms, though, even if there's other ways of just being connected.
Yeah, I ask because there's something about family dynamics where everybody can relate in some way to the idea of hating somebody's guts, seeing the complete decrepitude of this thing pretending to be a human being, and yet fundamentally loving them, not only because you have to, but because there's something charming about them, because they're family. You might despise so much about them, you might even despise them, but there's still somebody to whom you have a covenantal, even biological sort of, or functionally biological sort of bond, and you couldn't get rid of it if you wanted to. And I guess at some level, I don't know how much that applies to American, but I waffle back and forth about how much good. Do you have any thoughts on this, Rena?
Yeah, I am impressed with the notion that America is made up of many tribes, and that even geographically and historically, there's been books written about, I forget the name of the guy who wrote it, but 11 tribes. The South, the Midwest was settled by the Germans, and then other parts were settled by Swedes, and New York City, the Dutch and their culture came, and that we are really culturally maybe more tribal than we are like one big family. And we have these different tribes that interact and intersect, and but above it all are things that we all share in common, like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and certain beliefs about ourselves as a nation, because we're not a nation like we're all French and we're proud of French culture. We're a different kind of nation, which is a collection of tribes. And so that's kind of more how I think of it. Less than one family than a collection of tribal families that have had to figure out how to get along and how to have a single identity.
We're going to go to audience questions in just one moment, both online audience and the in-person audience. But I have one final thing, and you guys can keep this short if you like, or you can answer it at longer length. But I'm wondering what you think about the nature of catharsis in the family setting, and what the relation of catharsis in the family setting is to political depolarization as well. Like, to what degree is like family members just having to absolutely destroy each other at Thanksgiving either helpful or even perhaps necessary to the maintenance of that family? And to what degree is there a similar dynamic in America too?
Well, I just want to say, I don't think that a Thanksgiving dinner where people destroy each other, is it helpful to that family or to America?
Metaphorically.
Metaphorically, right, even metaphorically. So a family dinner where people figure out how to talk about something that they have disagreement about in a civil way, that's positive. I'm not sure that like just take off the Band-Aid and let's go at it gets anywhere. You know, so.
Yeah, okay, so, my goal is mostly sort of not have distortions about the other side that makes them seem more threatening than they really are. Going to, it's kind of verbal blows is not the most obvious way that I see to get there. So, I mean, again, well, you can look at our YouTube channel and see our last conversation about debates. Again, it's sort of like, do you want to go pugilistically to get here? I mean, like, it can theoretically work, but usually this shortest distance between 2 points is a line, rather than some kind of curve that goes way off to the side first.
This might be solely and exclusively because I'm a temperamental romantic, but I think, like, as I think back on the most depolarizing moments I've ever had, like top 10 over the course of the last 15 years or so, it's about equal numbers, some kind of emotionally violent catharsis thing with somebody I disagreed with, and then equal parts a quiet, calm, peaceful moment of realization. I don't know how many people that applies to, but this is an interesting kind of thing. Well, with that, let's go to questions from the audience. Those of you online, if you can raise your Zoom hands, we will start looking at you. But meantime, let's go to the lady up front. Ma'am, you look familiar. Remind me your name. Bonnie. Nice to meet you again, Bonnie.
We were at a picnic.
That's what I thought. Yeah. Well, good to see you here.
So I meant to listen to some presentation online before I got here. Didn't make it, but I'm putting a couple of just titles together, and one of them was what do you do? I think that was the question. What do you do when you're triggered? And that's just talking to anybody, speaking of, I don't know if it's cathartic, but you could be talking with anybody, but I think you're maybe kind of susceptible to being, jumped, so to speak, ambushed by somebody in your family who all of a sudden comes out with something that, like, whoa, oh my God, can't believe you said that. And there you are, off to the races. And a lot of times it's provocative because the other person has said something kind of annoying or upsetting or just plain wrong. And so
the question is triggering.
So, but the other thing that, no, I can't remember the other part of my thing that's a question.
We can go with the first part and then
Um,
we can follow up with you if you want.
Well, it's that, you know, in my family, there are mostly Democrats. And there's one like super, but he doesn't like Trump, so we feel he's salvageable. But
Oh, people who like Trump are salvageable too.
yeah, right, but I'm just saying that the solution, this is the solution exchange. Our family solution has been that we just don't talk politics. You know, it's just, we just don't. It's a rule. And because of bad things that happened, like even 20 years ago, between the liberal and the not so liberal. So I am thinking that it is really important, if we're going to have constructive, useful conversations, to definitely recognize how we're going to handle this when I get triggered, because I was triggered by my brother last Christmas, and I was really sarcastic and judgmental, and I felt okay about that, you know, and in retrospect, oh, that was a big mistake, because that really lit his wick. And I think we really, the emotional bonds can be so strong, and just people are talking and then get on topics that they're excited in a good or negative way about. So I think it's really important that we all figure out how to talk to people, especially when they say something or do something.
Totally. Yeah. So triggering, you have to be very conscious if you're going to have a conversation with somebody from your family that is politically different. And you have to be conscious of your goal. You have to be conscious of your own emotion. To become someone that can engage properly takes a lot of discipline. And you might feel that emotion arising, and you can say, okay, there's my anger, but what do I want to do here? Can I put my anger aside enough to make a real connection? Enough to listen. You know, we run through in the workshops, we run through a process where you listen, you find something to agree about, you ask them if you're willing to pivot and listen. Are they willing to listen to get permission for them to listen to what you think about it? And then you state your perspective and, you know, ask them how that landed on them. So there are some steps you can go through.
I'm sure there are.
Yeah, right.
I
So
just think
I
it's
get it, and I think we probably need some other people.
I think
So,
it's critical.
further questions from the audience. Was that one for you, sir? What was your name, sir?
Neil.
Neil, Mr. Neil.
First, thank you for the presentation. I have about 4 questions.
If you can get them as wrapped into one.
I'm just going to ask the least fun one. The most fun one would have been about the Bunker family. But Rita, so what you said near the end, that, you know, we're maybe a country of tribes, but the one thing that's kind of bound us together is that respect for the Constitution and Bill of Rights. I would have agreed with that up until fairly recently. I'm not sure I agree with that right now. I don't know how you feel, but to me, that almost feels like that's kind of at the heart of a lot of the political schism right now. Is there this fundamental respect for the founding documents and the democracy that's kind of built on top of that? And if people believe that maybe other people don't accept that or believe that, and I don't know if you want to weigh in on your belief, whether you think some people on the political divide don't believe that anymore.
Would you also mind tying this question into something relevant to the family and politics?
Yeah, where would you go in terms of family discussion or societal discussion?
Well-
If that one point of commonality is not there, you believe it not to be.
Right. Well, one of the things to realize is that at this point, both sides think that the other side is abandoning the principles.
Okay.
So that's important to see. And that if we don't have, I personally believe if we don't have a renewed respect and commitment to those principles as a society as a whole, we're in big trouble. We are in big trouble. And so knowing that that's the key thing that binds us together, and that when that phrase, we feel like the other side is moving away from the key, it's like moving away from the family tradition. You have to put it in family terms. Then figuring out how we can reassert that and reconnect around those principles seems important.
So I agree with frame it a little bit differently. So I mean, there's this is an organization called Starts With Us. It's founded by the guy who created Kind Bars. And so they had this survey that shows, you know, like 90% of Americans believe in all these kind of typical values. So I don't think that the belief in the values themselves are changing all that much. To me, the issue is what are other concerns out there? And so the way that I describe it is that, right, if the other side is seen as really threatening, there can be a desire to win at all costs.
Yeah.
You know, this other thing that I care about be damned. And so it's the relative importance type thing. So it's remaining important, and I don't think that that's becoming less important. But this other factor that can sometimes outweigh it is increasing in importance. So that's why I'm interested in reducing this threat level to keep the Constitution and rule of law more important than like just winning at all costs.
For what it's worth right now, the main reason I don't believe in American ideals is I believe that the civil religion idea of American identity kind of forces a cerebral rationalism that is almost like weirdly theological in its style, where like if you have the correct interpretation of the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, you are a real American, and if you have anything other than my interpretation, you are not. Which that's not particularly uniting. And so I guess because in a family you can have family members who disagree completely on everything, including the interpretation of the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, and still be a family. I feel like there's something there about what American national and cultural identity can learn from that doesn't have to be based in high ideals that we can like destroy each other over. There's something that's far more mundane. John Wood would call it Kirkian, and he might be right, he might be wrong, but there's something far more like lived, to the degree that lived experience is the thing that means anything in identity, and I think it's the sole thing we can go on it. I feel like the family is a better metaphor for American identity, just at the mere level of the stability that we're all talking about here. Let's go to a question online from Anastasia Hercules. Also, what a wonderful name, Anastasia. I haven't seen it on Zoom yet.
Thanks, I had nothing to do with that. I did say though, just last night, so I'm a grad student at the University of Missouri St. Louis. I'm also a 14-year teacher, a history teacher, and I actually just recently left the classroom over political divides. And I just wanted to speak to the fact that I think that we are all united. I think the political gambit is kind of smoke and mirrors. I just got back from the National Council for the Social Studies this past weekend. And
I don't know if I saw you. There were 5,000 people, but I was there too.
There was not 5,000 people. It was like 3,500, and it was much smaller than it has been. But
It sounds like a
5,000, 1,500 people didn't show up.
But my experience, like, so even this last weekend, the seminars on political divide and how to cross the political divide, how to have civil conversations, those were the ones that were like overflowing, teachers standing in the hallways. Like, this is a huge concern. And I think I'm in a class right now that, we've both focused on civility and character. And I think a lot of the things that are controversial really aren't controversial. Like, once you take all the political heat and pressure off of it, people are concerned about how we can't even talk to each other, that we have like a breakdown in our society. And as a history person, like that breakdown really started like in the 1950s with the growth of the suburbs and insularity, and then people and like social media just adding to that flame of, you know, you can just watch the shows you want or be in these groups and you just live in this constant echo chamber. And so I think there is a growing awareness, and what we have all in common is that we're all like, we feel dehumanized. Like anytime you just, I mean, even my aunt this weekend, like I have a pretty conservative family, and my aunt just started talking about things, and she worked in a hospital, and I always think teachers and nurses share a lot of the same struggles.
Anastasia, would you mind turning this into a question as well, please?
Oh, I guess my question was more along the lines of, is it really, are we as divided as we think we are? And those triggers, do those come from a lack of relationship? When it's like, that's really the goal, is the relationship. Everything else will follow if you build those relationships.
This is an excellent question. Thank you for that. James, you want to take that first?
Yes and no. Yeah, so yes, I mean, you know, I right, am starting a nonprofit on the premise that we are less divided than we think, right? That there's a lot of work on what sometimes called the perception gap, or false polarization, right? The divides are less extreme as people think they are. Now, in terms of how do we get there, right? I mean, you know, there's a lot of discussion, but I point a lot to the information environment. What are the messages that we see and hear? And yes, I mean, you mentioned social media, but you know, there's similar incentives in news media and electoral systems where there's incentives for people to demonize the other side. How do you get followers on social media? Right, say pretty extreme polarizing things. How do you get people to listen to news, watch it? It's similar to this attention economy thing, and for politicians, often it's play to the base so you can win a primary. I think that tends to fray relationships. There is this kind of big sort type question, but it seems like the research mostly shows that people are polarizing in place rather than moving to place. I mean, yeah, that also happens, but it seems like there's more polarization that are occurring with people. Okay, a greater share comes from people not from having moved, but just like places themselves changing quite a bit. Like I lived in Houston, and right, while I was there, it became much bluer as a large city, and you know, my representative flipped, and right, it changed quite significantly.
So, no, we're not as divided as we think we are. And no, relationships are not the first thing for that. It's a question of the stories we tell ourselves. Is that right?
Stories we are told.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, same question to you, Rena.
I think that's right. We're not as divided as we think we are. And that's true. I mean, polls show that on lots of issues. Guns, for example, is a good example where a lot of Americans agree on certain things that should be done, but the political system keeps us divided. So there's something about the paralysis in the political system that these kind of common ground changes that people would like don't happen. You know, we can't wait for that to be solved. We have to take action on the ground. We have to kind of move forward as best we can to change the nature of how we look at each other and how polarization plays out in our life. So we have to take control over it, even though I think there are some much larger forces at play.
We are running right on the half hour, so we should be wrapping up here. And I was wondering if each of you would be willing to take a minute or so to give us some final thoughts on what we should be thinking as we go home for the holidays and go face the world's greatest problems in the comfort of our homes. Rena, you want to start?
So to get back to Archie Bunker, I remember when I'm old enough to remember when that program came out. And it came out at a time when the anti-war protesters and the construction workers, I'm from New York City, were fighting it out on the street. And I believe that program presented Archie as a human being. And that made a difference. Archie and his son-in-law, and everybody else around it. It was a family that was very polarized, but we could see them all as human beings. So when we think of it occurs to me when we think of larger strategies and getting everybody in a workshop, can we have more of that kind of media, and shows and get that into the culture of really saying who are we as people and getting to know each other as human beings beyond the political stands that we take. So that's just a thought.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess on that, so a lot of depolarization is based on something called contact theory, right? So if you have good contact with someone from the other group, one's thoughts and feelings about that other group will improve. There are a lot of caveats there, but since then, that was created in the mid-1950s, right? So there's been a lot of research since. And there are things like vicarious contact theory or parasocial contact theory. So if we see other people having good conversations, that matters. If we see a character who we connect to from this other group, that matters. That'll be the parasocial version. And right, as someone who thinks in terms of scale, right, those kinds of theories are really important to me. And then you have things like there's this Stanford Strengthening Democracy Challenge, which I'll always find an excuse to talk about, which shows that of the methods to improve how people feel about the other side, but also democratic norms and political violence, correct the misperceptions. 2 of the 3 that work best were explicitly about correcting these assumptions that the other side is more different than they really are. And the other one were 2 governors, right? Or it was 2 gubernatorial candidates, including Spencer Cox, who's the head of the National Governors Association right now, just saying good things about each other, and upholding democratic norms, talking for a minute. That was those were the 3 most impactful kinds of interventions, and right, multiplying them again and again is really important. But first, we have to build a community here of people who can work together to do this at my house, half a block away, when we'll have our holiday party.
Well, James and Rena, thank you for joining us tonight. And everybody on our online audience, everybody here in our audience in DC, thank you all for being here and spending St. Nicholas Day learning about how to have a better Christmas season in one very specific way. I'm going home to a family that has enough little neuroses amongst ourselves that are not caused by politics, but which are exacerbated by politics. And I will be looking forward to learning a lot this season myself. And I hope you all, to the degree that that experience is something that you and 19% of our fellow Americans share as well. I hope that this holiday season you can find something in the family as well to have hope for as we go into the grand new year of 2024. And on that note, happy holidays, happy new year, and we will see you all at James's party and otherwise somewhere in the new year, depolarizing America as we depolarize ourselves. Thank you, Braver Angels.